team of us.
Yes, now Six Nations opening weekend is very much upon us. We are looking ahead with Keith Wood. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing, Joe?
I'm very well. And Stuart Barnes, we desperately wanted you on this week. We've been in touch with you for several weeks at this stage, and alas, you're here. Hello.
Hi there, Joe.
You missed Keith Wood's big surprise 50th birthday on the show last week, by the way. He's the big 5-0 now.
I can't believe Keith is that old.
It helps when you've looked this way for a long time. That's the only thing, you know.
That is the secret. So let's get the ball rolling then. In just broad terms, Stuart, are you looking forward to this Six Nations? I presumably you generally do. If so, what is it about this year's tournament that is catching your fancy?
Well, I don't want to sound an old cynic, but I often don't look forward to the Six Nations because if you're working on it journalistically, you've got to be a bit cold-blooded. And for so many years, the atmosphere's great and the party's fantastic, crack if you want to call it that, in Ireland, but the standards have been poor. And I thought last year I was dreading 2021 because of the awfulness of the autumn. And I would say 1 year on, I'm really shocked because we came out of a dire Lions series, I felt, and to be fair, the European rugby nations have picked themselves up. France are on an upward curve, so they remain a very exciting experiment. But Ireland, ever since they started winning in the Six Nations, have got better and better. And England, under Eddie Jones, look as if they're going to be transformed yet again. We're going to see a new England. And Scotland maintain a steady improvement in terms of results, more importantly, performance. So I think it's one of the best and most competitive Six Nations in the last 10, 20 years.
A point which came up in our chat on Monday evening when we were looking ahead to the tournament as well is that in Marcus Smith, in Finn Russell, in the French, be it Jalibert or Ntamack, whoever's alongside Dupont, in Ireland's recent change of style, Northern Hemisphere rugby maybe less risk averse by design or circumstances, personnel, I don't know, but there's a lot of flair out there maybe in comparison with recent times.
Oh yeah, and hallelujah to that. The break has been on in European rugby. One of the worst side effects of professionalism has been an overcoaching. When you take the field, players have to make the decisions, and it is not to the benefit of teams not to do that. And yeah, people say to me, South Africa won the World Cup, but they had overwhelming power when it mattered. Now, if you don't have overwhelming power, you will find yourself coming up short. And I think teams like England, Ireland to an extent have understood that. Wales as well, who have changed dramatically under PVAC. So, I think there's a realisation. It's the New Zealand-South Africa thing. New Zealand have found it very hard to handle the Springboks physically in their history, so they play a different brand of rugby, and they beat South Africa more often than not. And I think European nations have seen that, and maybe the Lions tour in some way. I don't know, Yuki, I think maybe the Lions tour had an impact on that. A, they lost, and B, after losing, they realised that it was a really stagnant affair.
Yeah, I think every time we have discussions about this, we can drift into smiling and nostalgia, and yet I couldn't but agree with you more. And I felt, for me, I got upset in the Lions, and actually I do think that has had a huge knock-on. I got upset not at the manner in which New Zealand or the way South Africa played. That's the way they play. And I remember saying at the time, just give them the credit that that's the way they play. Stop saying they're boring. They play that way. It's very, very successful for them. It has been forever. A particular blend of styles, trying to play against them without invention. And I thought it was funny because I looked back on it afterwards, and I would have picked Dan Biggar at 10 all the way through, but I would have expected him to have a bit of a cut more than he did during it. And it only freed up at all when the maverick Finn Russell comes in at 10 after 10 minutes. And like, he frightened the life out of me as a player, but he showed what was actually possible. And it was in a losing cause, but he showed what actually was was possible for people to go and play. And then you go and you see, and we've had this argument actually several times over the lack of relegation in the Premiership. I'm a fan of it, and I think it frees up different times that people can go and have a cut, and there's no relegation this year. And I think it's taken some of the pressure off that huge fear of losing, as opposed to letting a team go out and win. And we've also seen with Harlequins when they've got their when they got the chance and the opportunity at the end of last season, they actually showed that let's just throw everything at it and see what happens. Let's have a cut at every place. Now, that will rarely ever happen on international rugby. But the one thing that sticks out from what you've said, it is that players have to be able to read what's in front of them. It can't be coached to that one point. It can actually for a season. But after that, it loses all its effectiveness. And some parts of the game need to be structured, which are the scrums and the lineouts and some of the mauls and elements of that. And they need a lot of coaching, and it is technically difficult. But other than that, the joy for a fan, and maybe for a couple of has-beens, is watching somebody see a chink of a gap and conjure a little bit of magic and open up an unbelievably tight defence because they've seen something. Yeah. And that doesn't come out of the coach's handbook. It comes out of playing what they see in front of them.
Well, that brings us neatly to one of the main reasons, Stuart, we wanted to get you on and talk to you, because in England and in Marcus Smith, a superstar may be about to be born over the next few weeks. He's been doing it in a very niche way by comparison with the 7-10 million who might watch him do his thing for England on the BBC over the coming weeks. So in Marcus Smith, what have we got here? Can you cast your out half eye over him?
I think he's extremely talented player. He could be extraordinary. There's been a lot of rubbish written about Marcus Smith in the early years. There's quite a few people who can't trust him and saying, well, now he's got to step up to international. He did that in the autumn, and I thought, whilst he didn't get headlines, in a South African pack that dominated England, he played on the back foot against the Springboks, with England having injuries all over the park in early stages, and he kept the shape. Now, that's really important for a fly half, because we all know Marcus Smith has this ability, this pyrotechnic ability to just unleash attacks from all angles. He's got astonishing acceleration. He's got great vision. But what I was so impressed with against Springboks was he held the England shape. And England ended up scoring 3 tries that were driven by back play against the Springboks. It goes back to what Keith was saying about the Lions series. You don't beat teams by imitating them. You've got to do something fresh. And I think Eddie Jones, after the World Cup final, thought we've got to be like South Africa. Now he sees a way that they've got to filter their game and be different. And, England might just be lucky, because I think Marcus Smith doesn't need Owen Farrell. I think Owen Farrell is a very good player if you want the coach's words to be followed to the letter N. And I think Smith is not like Finn Russell. Finn Russell weaves his own way within the pattern, whereas the English fly half is very much a player of structure, but it's a loose structure you have to give him to play. Again, Woody said it, forwards, you've got to be taught to scrum and line out and have your systems there. Backs, you have to have a framework and a skeleton there. But under Ford and Farrell, England played too much, not what was in front of them, but what they'd been coached on the practice field, whereas Marcus Smith will play what he sees within the shape. It's not as fluent as Russell, but Russell has been around longer, but it's a different game. And I think Jones can live with it, because Smith himself will play a structure, but it'll be a faster, more dynamic one. And a lot of pressure on England will be on the forwards to maintain front foot ball, and on Ben Youngs not to crab 2 paces before passing, and to make sure the quality of his pass is the preeminent aspect of his game, as opposed to just booting box kick after box kick.
Stuart, there's a piece on this which, and I really enjoy watching Marcus Smith play. I like when you've young kids that are playing and you're trying to say he's a small guy, but watch how he defends, because he sprints in the line and tackles on the side. It's extraordinary. It's incredibly effective. He doesn't get injured. He's 22 years of age. He's played 113 games for Quins. That's almost a lifetime for a lot of players, you know. And he's played a huge amount of games, so he's very experienced, and he's 22. But it's the spark, it's a bit of the joy that he has. It's the outrageous goose step that doesn't do a huge amount, but just puts a little chink of doubt in the defensive system, and he goes through it. But it's an offload to somebody else. So, but for me, if he plays at 10, I think they have to pick Don Brandt at 8, because I think he gives them a huge sense of comfort. I'm interested to who they play at 12, because Esther Hazen has been phenomenal for him. If there's been any pressure at any stage, he can offload. And will he get the ball as quickly as he gets from Danny Kerr? And that is the question. So will he fit into whatever system Eddie Jones is going? And it's a New England, as he's described it himself. He's not changing, so he'll change the team. So he'll take some of the flack from that. But like, will Smith get the ball in the manner in which he wants it?
Yeah, I think the forward, you know, we're talking about Smith all the time. I read something Finn Russell said earlier in the week, that he played an extraordinary game of European rugby for Racing against Northampton. It's as close to perfect as I've seen from a fly half. And Russell said, yeah, but that was easy because we had complete dominance on the game line, and our dynamism was a different class to Northampton. So it's very easy to do that. And there have been times in the past where England's have looked perhaps more effective at 10 than they really are, because they've been bossing the game. And I think England will look to ensure that they'll have a 6-2 bench, Keith, so that they will have 2 back rows in, and they will just try and use forward power like South African, just to keep going forward, to make sure that whether it's Randall coming off the bench at 60, Smith throughout the game, that England have half a metre to go forward. Because I can tell you, as a fly half myself, I remember a Calcutta Cup game against Scotland too long ago, when for an hour we had dominance and I looked quite a good player. A week later, I thought this Six Nations game is easy. We played Ireland. We got thumped up front. I tried to do the same thing. Everything went wrong. It's that big a difference for an outside half. Yeah, you know, had I had a brain, I would have adjusted. But Smith's 22, and England, to help him, just got to say, let's try and give him a millimetre going forwards, not a millimetre going backwards. If you do that, he'll be effective. The other way, I still think he's smart enough to readjust and to play a kicking game. He's a magnificent footballer. But it does, if he's going backwards, give the opposition a chance to get into him. When he plays that second wave and loops around and just tries to use his speed there, he opens himself up there to a Scottish back row forward, just getting hold of him. South Africa did once or twice, and he bounced back. But if England dominate up front, I don't see anyone getting too close to him. And then they become, I think, one of 3 contenders to win the tournament.
Okay, well, on that point then, Stuart, so with Eddie Jones, there is a boom or bust quality to his Six Nations. He's been coach for 6 of them. In that time, 3 titles of the 6, but twice he's finished 5th. He's been especially vociferous about prioritising the World Cup from this point in. So what do you expect from England?
I think England will prioritise performance over results. I think last year was a complete waste of a year. Autumn through to the Six Nations, England kept the same players. They were playing Saracens, who were playing in the Championship. There was no surprise they had no form. It was a waste of a year. I think Jones will never say it, but he knows he made a howler. And France have got themselves a jump on everyone, because France immediately prioritised 2023 as soon as the other World Cup was over. That was a key. And okay, they've lost some matches, but their performance is speaking for itself. And I think England will prioritise 2023, and Eddie Jones will never say it, and it's quite right not to. But if England do lose to Scotland, and if England do lose to France, but they play rugby that is developing their game, that is developing the 23-man rugby that England can put together, we know they have power, but they could be new to something. If they can hold on with that and not panic, not back off if things go wrong on a wet and windy day as it can be in Edinburgh, then I think they're in the right direction. So the key for England is definitely not chickening out if anything goes wrong, but just keep playing, keep developing a brand of rugby that is dynamic up front, that revolves around England being positive as opposed to just pressurising the opposition and trusting Smith. And well, I'd like to see Randall given a start, but maybe Marcus Smith will be the breath of fresh air that lifts Ben Youngs on the international stage as well.
Okay, to talk Ireland then, Keith, I think one of the reasons for optimism is that particularly, I mean, it started with the England game in the Six Nations, but especially in November, we've been in that lovely position of results and performance. Results have been fantastic, and we've seen quantum leap in the style of rugby. So, I mean, more of the same, please. That's why there's almost the past week or so in Ireland, an absence of any real debate, because there's a degree of, well, geez, can we keep this going? Because everything looks pretty good.
Well, look, we had, I think we've had for the last 2 or 3 years, preponderance of conversations over Johnny Sexton, because the depth chart behind him, none of them have really stood up to take on the mantle, and that's made it very, very difficult. And so we were saying, maybe you make the change now. He's going to be old. He's not going to be older. He's going to be old when you get to the World Cup. And that isn't the conversation at the moment. And the only reason that isn't the conversation is that the structure and style that Ireland played in the autumn was a world away from basing it on one ageing player. And now I think he can play in that system. And I think other players can play in that system without it being, oh my God, the pressure of the world on his shoulders. So for a period, Johnny took it flat to the line, got smashed. So we worried about his health because he got smashed. Then when he got smashed too often, he was taking it too deep and not going to the line. And we're saying, for God's sake, he's lost a yard of pace. But within this structure, there's maybe 4, 5, 6 different options for him to pull a trigger on. And that just frees up so much. And sometimes he'll go to the line, and that's fantastic when he does. He's going to get hit when he does. So you still hope that he's able to take that hit. But it isn't just based on him. It's based on other players running a whole variety of different lines in support, or hard lines, or soft passes from the props, from different players making decisions. That's why the comfort is there. I think Ireland played well in the autumn, and when you see the victories that were there, the manner in the victories, there was no fluke in them. You say, yes, that's fantastic. I'm going to follow part of Stuart's train of thought, which is we want to see a continuation of that game, and that game developed, because we are a year out from the World Cup, a year and a half out from the World Cup. It isn't the end game. There has to be more. There has to be more players getting involved at different times. We did see in the autumn wingers coming in off the wing. We just haven't seen that for 5 or 6 years. And it just offers a different threat all the time. So it's how many players can be a threat. And you'll know, if you talk to any player, if there's an option that they do really, really well, let's block that option. There's 5 options. Sometimes you're going to get, and sometimes you're going to get it wrong. So I have comfort in this. In this, that doesn't mean I think Ireland are a shoo-in to win it. There's none of that loose optimism or confidence. I think what Ireland did was in the autumn was great, because we'd had a good result at the end of the Six Nations, but we had drifted for a while. Yeah. There was an element of a transition from coach to coach. We now look as if we are a team that's kind of happy in the manner where they're going. Now, you always want to shake that up. You want them happy, but you want them challenged. So I just think I love the Six Nations, but I love the challenge that we have are France and England away from home. I want to see how Ireland stack up against an English team that they don't really know a huge amount about, a French team that they know an awful lot about. Can they make them a little bit fragile? Is that possible? You know, it's intriguing for this competition.
Yeah. Stuart, I'm sure you watched the New Zealand performance. I mean, a lot of the hanging our hats we're doing is on that New Zealand performance in particular. What have you made of this change in Ireland?
Oh, one thing is Ireland's still there's still a big reliance on ball retention, but the massive difference is in the dying years of the Joe Schmidt era, it was ball retention over everything, so it got very slow. And I would say to you, without being overly critical, if you looked at CJ Stander, it was pick and drive, and you know, he got these plaudits for how many carries and how many meters. But defensively, one person was just dropping off because Ireland had men fall into the ground. Now, you know, you're not going to get 5 or 6 decoy option runners if you're not playing at any pace. Ireland have transformed the pace of their game, and that is the difference for me. You know, I've got to say, I felt from the England game onwards through to Argentina, which I thought that was notable. Because having beaten New Zealand and having quite a few different players there, they went and thrashed an Argentina team who had given France a decent game. And I would say that on the latter part of 2021, Ireland were the best team in the world. We had all this hoo-ha before the World Cup when Wales and Ireland were becoming number one. And you're thinking, it's all nonsense. It's not true. It's not there in the performance. Well, it is at the moment. You know, Ireland, I think, are on current form the best team in the world. But on their day, France might just be even a little bit better. And as Keith says, France have Ireland at home and they have England at home. So just as Ireland have got this horrible 2 away fixtures, France have got the opportunity. And to me, they were inspired against New Zealand. Somehow Ireland have got to put the pressure back on them in Paris. I think they can do it. And it's easier for Johnny as a fly half because everything's happening quicker. So defences are under pressure. People used to say to me in the early days of Super Rugby, defence, rubbish. See how many tries there are in New Zealand. It's not because defence is rubbish. It's because breakdown ball is quicker. The options are faster. People are coming, more of them from depth at angles. You can't, it's a completely different world. Defensively, it's hard to defend when you don't know when it's coming from. When it was the last year of Joe Schmidt and it was all pick up and drive from CJ Stander, we clapped our hands at 28 phases, which went nowhere.
Yeah. God, Keith, I don't know whether to feel uneasy or not. There was something very pleasing about here. Stuart Barnes saying we're the best team in the world in late 2021.
Yeah, it reminds me of Martin Bayfield's story where you're absolutely collared by praise and you don't know where you're going afterwards, you know. So it was like a reversal of a story. But I think it's funny. I don't go to those superlatives just yet, and partly because I've seen enough of them come a cropper, and maybe that's ruining the joy for me. And I know that it isn't something that fits very well. I think we could, if we have a consistent level of performance now, you know, I when you look at something over 3 or 4 weeks, I think when you start talking best in the world, you want to see that over a longer period of time. Sure. And but I don't know if you remember this, Joe, but we were on a show on the Sunday, and we were like giddy kids. Because there was a joy, it was a joy to watch. It wasn't just
after the New Zealand win. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't just a win. It wasn't about that. And you know, we get a bit down on ourselves a little bit because are we being too hard on, you know, on players or on teams or stuff like that. But you still want to have a huge enjoyment from it. And you go back to the idea, like it's called a brand or it's called entertainment. Well, do you know what? It's strangely, as you slag me off for getting 50, as I get older, and I think that this is what people are spending their money on, I do think they want enjoyment. Now, they want to win, but actually what they'd like both, if they can get both together, that's just the most perfect Saturday, So I think there is an onus to be able to do it, and not to do it every single time. And sometimes you have to grind out the ugly win, and everybody's happy with that as well. I don't think anybody will ever complain. And some days things just don't work right for you. And if you can manage a win on those days, isn't that magic? But overall, you want to see a bit of a journey, an element of development. You want to see young fellas getting an opportunity and excelling on this stage. Six Nations stage is magic. It's because there's a huge passion, a huge noise. Can't wait to see the full stadia again. There's a need for all that, and everybody's a little bit flat. Having come through a long winter. It's a winter that's been about 2.5 years. So, look, I'm looking forward to getting as excited as we were after that All Black game.
Yeah. Now, Stuart, in your defence, you did bring up France as well and said that they may well just have the ability to be better again. So let's talk France and Dupont and this journey that they've been on. The only thing it's really missing is going through a Six Nations campaign without a blow-up somewhere and a mistake somewhere, and to actually win the Six Nations. Otherwise, everything about their 2023 journey is right on track.
Listen, it reminds me very much of England at the turn of the century. And I can remember I was in a bit of a minority when England were losing games to Scotland or to Wales, and ex-players were saying, God, what's Woodward doing? What England were doing then, they were pushing the boundaries. England has always been a conservative rugby team. They were playing rugby and they were going as far as they could. And in the process, they made some fundamental errors. Now, I've watched France since that last World Cup, and I have seen a very similar pattern. A French team that have played wonderful rugby at times, but have done probably some of the dullest things in the last 2 years. But in that performance against New Zealand, we saw them beginning to shut out the errors. And I think now, that New Zealand game was the beginning for France. They've worked out their 2 years of how they get better. And this is very much the third year before the fourth year Six Nations in the World Cup, where France have to strike. And France have been putting big pressure. I've been talking to journalistic mates there. They're talking up themselves, even though Rafael Ibanez thinks it's the perfidious English saying how good they are. But they have picked young players. The young players have come through. Dupont symbolises all that's good about France. Now for them, it's a matter of translating performance into results. And earlier in the show, I talked about them being a year ahead of England. They're probably 18 months ahead of England. And that's why England have got to keep going. And Ireland too, if the World Cup is of real substance, because I think we'll see at the end of this year a French team who will be vying for favouritism. Ireland played the best rugby in 2021, but if you said to me who's got the best potential and whose curve is the steepest, I would stick with France. And that's why, to me, it's the hardest Six Nations in many a long year, because we've not touched on Scotland, who look a lot better than we've seen them for a while. But I would tip France to win a Grand Slam this year. It mirrors the progress of the England 2003 World Cup winning team to date.
Yeah, it does. As a brief aside, and then we'll have to begin to wrap. When Dupont, because Stuart, don't have you on all that often, Dupont runs these trail lines and picks up try after try after try. It looks like the most natural thing in the world. Why don't other number 9s do that continually?
I don't know. I mean, one thing is, great players make it look easy. Yeah. And the rest of us say, well, why can't we all do that? He's got searing pace. There's also defensive systems are also 6s and 7s when you play against Dupont, because when he makes the odd break, you get sucked in to mark him, and it creates space for people like Entermac and forward runners like Aldrich. And when they make those bursts, he's then that second wave who was marked initially coming through. But it's an incredible ability he has, and he does make it look easy. But you've got to look at what Dupont is doing first phase, how that little break in the 12th minute sucked in two defenders, so that when the guy in the midfield makes the break, Fiku or Ntamak, then suddenly the opposition are out of shape, and he's coming, and he's got a Gareth Edwards-like pace in that he can wait, and then when he trails and goes, his acceleration over 40 is astonishing. And I think he's the best scrum half the world has seen since Edwards, and that includes Fourie du Preez, who I think was one of the finest players of the 21st century to date.
There's a philosophical element on it as well. So France are trying to play fast now. So if France play fast, if he isn't there, somebody else is going to pick up the ball and pass it. He's running a positive line because he's looking to get the score. So sometimes he's not going to be there to pass the ball. Now, in times past, if you did that in Ireland, you'd be dropped, because the scrum half should be always at the breakdown, always. But Aaron Smith scored so many tries over his time with New Zealand by corner flagging. He said, I expect the guy to break the first tackle, and I'll be on his inside for that inside pass, and he's there always. Dupont is different. He does a little bit of corner flagging, but he is always there as an option when there's a break. And you can't do that if you're waiting for the breakdown. And there is that change of thought or process. So can it be taught? I think it can, but it depends a huge amount on what your coach is going to let you go and do as well, and what all your coaches have up to that point. He was obviously able to shine as a young fella, and it was accepted that this is part and parcel of this game.
We'll touch on Wales and Scotland by dint of getting a prediction from you both on the weekend's game. So Keith, we start in Dublin, Ireland against Wales. Last year they came in off a terrible November, but then a lot of the old dog, or the old dogs for the hard road, came in. This time around they are without Alan Wynne-Jones, they are without Ken Owens, Faletau, Halfpenny, Lydiate, Navidi is out, George North is out, and Justin Tipperick is out amongst others. So on that basis, most are saying even Wales, despite their wonderful oddness to surprise us all in the Six Nations, even Wales can't overcome this, certainly in Dublin.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think Wales, when they put on the jersey, the players who play in their club sides suddenly turn into something different. They tend to rely on a lot of those guys that you've mentioned who are injured. I would look at it slightly differently. I would say that a lot of those guys are old and nearly over the hill. So will they get to the World Cup? Will they... or will these players take an opportunity and say, we're not going to give this jersey back, so how can you make that your own? So I use this phrase too often, but it's pretty much a freebie for this Welsh team. I think they don't have to be afraid of performance or of anything. I think they can go for it. Having said that, I don't think that this particular Welsh side is strong enough at the moment, and I don't think they'll get there, and I would expect Ireland to win. Okay.
Stuart, Scotland, one of the most bizarre fourth place finishes of all time last year, with wins in London and Paris. So England at Murrayfield?
Well, I understand why you gave Keith Ireland versus Wales, obviously, but that was the easy call. I have no doubt Ireland win that. That England game, bookmakers are making England narrow favourites, and I understand why it's narrow. It wouldn't surprise me if Scotland won, but when it all comes down to it, I think England might just have the last 20 minutes a bit more power up front, and they might just be able to squeeze this one out. I think it's very tough because Scotland don't fear England. Russell has an excellent record against them. It is going to be a very hard game for England, and England are, as we said earlier, they had a win in autumn, but they're still new to it. So I would take England to win, but I would not be surprised if they lose. And that's not Stuart Barnes sitting on the fence. I think that's a reflection that this is a tight game.
Okay. And in a line as opposed to in a paragraph, who wins the championship?
France.
Keith?
I'd like to say Ireland.
Say
I
that.
am saying Ireland, sorry.
You do whatever you like, okay? Okay, Ireland, France. Either way, that'll be a bit of fun. Keith, always good to have you on. We'll talk to you soon. Stuart Barnes, brilliant to have you on. Thanks so much for making time for us in Six Nations Week. Lovely to have you on.
Cheers.
Okay,
Cheers,
thanks.
gents.
Thanks, fellas. And our rugby coverage here on Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to a team of us. And with thanks to Vodafone, brilliant prize. We want to send you to Ireland-Wales this coming Saturday with a set of 3 tickets, all with thanks to Vodafone. So to get your name in the draw, which is on this evening, just tell us here. Our mystery voice is consoling Off the Ball's Nathan Murphy after his golfing performance with Paddy Andrews this week.
It's possible, Nathan, and it can happen. Everybody can kind of have, one of those off days.
He did shoot 134.
It's possible, Nathan, and it can happen. Everybody can kind of have, one of those off days.
If you know who that is, give us your name, obviously, and text 53106 and your answer, and we'll get back to the winner sometime this evening. Hashtag Team of Us. That's rugby for this evening. Brian Driscoll's going to be on the show tomorrow night as well.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.